my parents decided that I should go to piano lessons. My dad decided I'm going to piano lessons, and he sent me to piano lessons when I was 6, and I absolutely hated it. After a year, I just gave it up. Didn't like it one bit. And then I gave it up when I was 7. And when I was 8, he tried again. He said, have another go at the piano lesson. So I tried when I was 8, and I still hated it. So I gave it up when I was 9. And then I started again when I was 11, and I haven't given up yet. So I think I'm doing okay this time. I guess one of the guys that really got me into jazz was Chick Corea. I joined a school big band, and a bit like the piano lessons, I absolutely hated it. I didn't like it at all. But I stuck with it because I was too naive to say no. And we were playing all these pieces, and I didn't really like them, and I wasn't really into it. But we always played this one that was called Spain, and it had a good energy to it. And I thought one day, I went home from the rehearsal and thought, maybe I should listen to this kind of music. So I went and I listened to Spain, and just from that moment on, it was, I love this music. This is just great. So Chick Corea was one of my big influences. And then from him, I got into other pianists like Herbie. Herbie was a big influence as well. Really getting into that kind of funk stuff as well. But then I really started to get into more like acoustic stuff after that. I started with like the Chick Corea acoustic records after that. And then somebody gave me a Brad Meldau record. This is probably around 2006, 2000, and I listened to it once and I didn't like it at all. And then I came back to it a couple of years later, and it just clicked, and it just made sense. So for me, Brad Meldau has always been a massive influence, and I'm going to throw in Aaron Parks as well. Somebody whose music I absolutely love. I've had the pleasure of interviewing him a couple of times. And he's just the nicest guy, and his music is great. It's really, really unique, and I think he's just such a real idiosyncratic pianist. A student of mine was playing at a jazz festival up north, and he'd agreed to do a couple of gigs in advance, and the promoter had said to him, would you do the Keith Jarrett Köln concert, because it was the big anniversary of the Köln concert. And he agreed to do it, and after starting work on it, he realised, maybe I'm not quite ready for an entire hour of improvised jazz piano. So he asked me, would I do it? It's a musician thing. Somebody calls you, can you cover a gig? Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll cover that gig. Keith Jarrett Cologne concert? Yeah, sure. How hard can it be? Yeah. I thought, yeah, why not? So I agree, because solo piano is something that I've been really, really interested in. It's something that I'm going to be doing a lot of this year and hopefully next year. For pianists, it's one of the hardest things you can do. So whenever I decided that I wanted to put on the Köln concert, there was a couple of ways that I thought about doing it. Should I learn the whole thing note for note? I'm not going to do that. That's going to take way too much time and way too much effort. Should I improvise my own hour of music? That's not really that's in the spirit of it, but it's not really the Köln concert. That's just me. So instead, what I decided to do is I decided to take the first kind of minute or so of each of the movements. There's 4 movements in it. Play them as accurately as possible to the original Keith Jarrett recording, and then improvise from there. So in a way, I'm trying to get myself into the same place that Keith Jarrett got himself, and he goes one way and I go another way. So it really, for me, it's the absolute best way that I can really try and get into playing that kind of music. Usually the piano makes a difference, the room makes a difference, the audience makes a difference, what mood I'm in makes a difference, what I've been listening to makes a difference, because it's totally improvised. Yes, there are things that will be similar each time, the kind of maybe chord progressions that I like to play and stuff like that, but sometimes I'll play more atonally and sometimes I'll play more tonally, and it really, that's the thing about improvised music, is it really is a snapshot of who you are at that time, at that place, with this audience. Playing solo piano can be really, really daunting, because you step onto the stage and it's just you. There's no band. There's nobody else. It's literally just you on the stage. And it can be completely daunting, because you don't have anyone to fall back on. as a piano player, I spend a lot of my gig just comping underneath somebody else's solo. Maybe you play the introduction and then somebody else takes the melody, I take a solo, great, that's it. And even on my own gigs, if I'm playing with a trio, I might play the head, I'll take a solo, but then there's going to be a bass solo, there's going to be a drum solo. You've got that time to breathe, whereas when you're doing completely solo jazz piano, you don't have that space to breathe, so it's mentally really, really tough. And the first time I played it, I remember, I was really getting into something, and it was really, really physical. And I remember while I was playing thinking, this is hard work, this is like a workout here, Not only was my brain going just at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but I was really testing the limits of the technique as well. And that's what I love about solo piano. You can take it wherever you want. You can test your technique as much as you want. You can test your mental technique as much as you want, or as little as you want. And I think that's what's great about solo jazz piano, is just the absolute freedom that you have. Maybe you just want to play one note for 5 minutes, you can do that. If you want to play all notes on the piano at the same time, well, you can't really do that because the piano's quite big. But you get the idea. You can do whatever you want. So the next Jarrett concert that I'm going to be doing is on the 19th of February in the Carnegie Library in Dunleary. I cannot wait. It's a Thursday evening. I'm not sure what time, but it's around the time that the music starts. It's a venue that I've always wanted to play in. Venues in all of Ireland with a piano are hard to come by. So whenever I heard this as a piano, I thought, great, I would absolutely love to do it. And in terms of prep for it, again, I'll do a lot of technique practice. I'll sit and practice scales and arpeggios and technical stuff. But I like to really start listening to classical piano as well, and really dig into the classical pianists that I really like. What I probably won't do is I won't go and listen to Keith Jarrett, and I won't listen to the Köln Concert, because I don't want it to be an exact one-to-one of that. It's not a Keith Jarrett concert. It's his music, but he's not playing it. So I want to try and take him out of that and treat it almost as Jarrett the composer rather than Jarrett the pianist. So I'll dig into a lot of classical piano, a lot of Rachmaninoff, a lot of Chopin, a lot of Liszt, even a lot of Bartók and Debussy and Ravel, all these kind of early 20th century pianists that I absolutely love, and just immerse myself in that world. I probably might even play a little bit of it as I'm trying to get stuff together, but not to the point where I'm going to try and replicate that when I'm playing it. It's really just to really get that technique working. I always believe that when it comes to jazz, you need to have incredible technical facility and incredible sort of harmonic facility, but also incredible creativity. And if you can put all those three together, you're doing great. If you can't put all three of them together, it's going to be a slightly frustrating gig. So I really try and work on trying to develop all three of those as I prepare for one of these concerts. So I've been playing Hammond organ now for just coming up on 10 years, and a friend of mine lent me an organ about just over 10 years ago. Asked me, do you want to mess around on it? And I initially thought, this is really good fun, and I enjoyed it and started getting a few gigs on it. And it was always my kind of bit on the side. I look at the piano and that's my main instrument, and then the Hammond organ is like, oh yeah, this is kind of fun. Then I started to take it a little bit more seriously, and there was quite a long period of time when all my gigs north of the border were piano and all my gigs south of the border were on Hammond organ. And it was quite bizarre. Now there's a few more piano gigs happening here, but I would say that the Hammond organ has seen a bit of a renaissance here, not just in Dublin, but in Belfast as well, and in Cork. There's a couple of Hammond organ players coming through. I mean, I wasn't into Hammond organ until I started playing it. I'd never heard any Hammond organ, and now if I can't make a Hammond organ gig, there's a handful of people that I can call to cover a gig for me. It's such a fun instrument to play. It'll still be my bit on the side, but it's so much fun to play. So the only downside with the Hammond organ is it's really heavy, and it's not much fun to lug up the stairs at Arthur's. So I've been running Scott's Jazz Club now for about 5 years, and it has quite an interesting backstory to it. There's a friend of mine, Cormac O'Kane, and he runs a studio up in Belfast, and he's a big jazz fan, he's a big music fan, and he's a keyboardist as well. But he had always mentioned to me that he wanted to run jazz nights. He was a big jazz fan. And we talked about running it at his studio, but it wasn't really appropriate. And during COVID, he was doing a lot of filming, he was doing a lot of live streaming, and he was filming in a place called the Hack Club in Ballyhackamore in Belfast. And he phoned me and he said, "This is an incredible venue. Do you want to start a jazz club?" And I said, "Sure, yeah, okay, yeah." It's September 2020. It's not really the perfect time to start a jazz club, not even in the centre of Belfast. This is like in suburbs in East Belfast. So I agreed, when he said, "Sure, let's put on a couple of gigs." And he said, "I want to call it Scott's Jazz Club." And I said, "That's a really terrible idea. I would rather you didn't, I think that's a bit seems a bit kind of self-indulgent to name it after me." And he said, "Look, there's a grant application due in 2 days' time. Let's just call it that. Get the grant application in. We can change it afterwards. Is that cool?" "Okay, yeah, that's fine." So we put on 2 gigs in September 2020. Then the government said, "You got to shut everything back down." We went into lockdown 2. We closed for a year. We did a few kind of online things, and then September 2021 we opened back up again, and we've been running every Friday since then, and it just seems to go from strength to strength to strength. I'm constantly surprised by the fact that people like jazz. I know that seems quite a strange thing to say, somewhere like this, but whenever I was growing up, I thought I was the only person who was kind of into jazz. Jazz gigs didn't really happen. So to get the support of people to come out every week to hear jazz is constantly surprising and always brilliant. So we've been running that now for 5 years. We've had artists from all across Ireland, all across the UK, all across Europe, all across the world come and play, and it's been great. I mean, it's not financially worth it at all. In fact, it's a really terrible idea, and if somebody said, "Should I start a jazz club?" I would say, "No, don't." But it's great fun. I've seen so much great music. I've met so many incredible musicians, and I got to play some nice gigs that maybe I wouldn't have got to do beforehand. So it's been really enjoyable, really tough, but yeah, definitely a lot of fun. So since we started in 2021, we've been trying to get a piano. I'm a pianist. I want to play a piano, but pianos are expensive. We can't afford to buy a piano. And we've been trying to appeal to the Arts Council, up north, and saying, "Can you help us buy a piano?" Because when you think about it, classical players constantly have access to great pianos. Nobody does a classical piano recital on a keyboard in a classical venue. You don't go and see somebody playing the Tchaikovsky Third Piano Concerto on a Roland keyboard. So why should I have some of the world's great pianists coming to Belfast and I have to get them to play a Kawai keyboard? So it's constantly been a struggle to get a piano. So we had the option to buy a piano quite recently, and it was more than we could afford. So we reached out to our audience and we started a crowdfunder where we got people to chip in and to sponsor a key. And there's 88 keys at the piano, and at the time of recording we've sold about 50 of them, and it's the support we've had from the community, from people all across Ireland, has just been incredible, to try and get this piano up onto the stage. Because for us, it's the last thing, that we've been trying to build. We've got a lovely stage, we've got a house bass, we've got house drums, we've got mics, we've got everything. We have really nice stuff, and it's not paid for with grants, it's paid for through ticket sales. So the piano was the last thing, also the most expensive thing. So we decided we'd just run this crowdfunder, and we honestly didn't know how it would go. And to get this far, even to have sold 50-ish keys out of an 88 key piano, has just been incredible. So I'm lucky enough to work in Dublin quite a lot. I also work a couple of days down in Cork at the School of Music in Cork, and I also work up in Belfast, which is where I'm from. So in a way, I have I'm quite lucky in that I get to dip into 3 different jazz scenes across the country: the Belfast scene, the Dublin scene, and the Cork scene. And each one of them is quite different, and they all have their strengths. You know, they all have a lot of great players in them. What I love about the Dublin scene in particular is the standard that everybody plays at. I mean, I remember one of the very first gigs I did in Dublin was on Hammond organ, and it was with John Moriarty, you know, super guitarist. He probably doesn't even remember this, but we were doing a gig, and I think he called, it might have been Secret Love or something like that, some tune that I knew and that I'd played a lot quite up north. And he said, let's do this one kind of medium tempo. And I was used to playing with the guys up in Belfast who were like, medium tempo is like 1, 2, 3, you know. And John said, okay, medium tempo, here we go, 1, 2. And at that moment, I just realized, whoa, hang on. There's a step up here. You know, there's a serious, like, you really got to get your stuff together if you want to play at this level in this city. So it was a real wake-up call. And the standard of musicianship, especially in the Dublin scene, has just been incredible, you know. And to get to play regularly, you know, in this city is absolutely brilliant. There are so many great musicians in the city. There's so many great gigs that happen in this city nearly every night of the week as well, which is great. And I'm lucky that I can bring some of the absolute best players here up to Belfast as well, because at the minute I don't think there's a regular Friday night gig in Dublin, which suits me down to the ground because it means everybody's free on a Friday night. I should probably give a shout out to Paul Dunlee down in Cork as well. You know, Cork is obviously a much smaller scene, but if there's one thing that's a constant in the Cork jazz scene, it's Paul Dunlee. You know, he works really, really hard to make stuff happen, and during the Cork Jazz Weekend, he puts together like countless amounts of gigs, you know, and he's been running a jam session down there on a Monday night, and it's been running every Monday for like over 15 years now, and it's really incredible. And again, it's a bit like the jam that happens here in Arthur's once a month. It's designed to give the next generation players a chance to get up on the stage, try stuff out, get it wrong, try stuff out, get it right. That's something that we don't have up in Belfast at the minute, is a good open jam session. But the fact that there's one here in Dublin and there's one in Cork, I think they're absolutely essential for a jazz scene, you know, to develop players, for players to learn from other players, for bands to get a sound together. I think that all of these things are what makes a really healthy jazz scene. And I see the jazz scene in Dublin kind of as an outsider because I'm not from here. But what I see is a collection of musicians who are all brilliant, who are all working together, who sometimes have different interests, put on different gigs in different places. But collectively, I see a really, really strong jazz scene here in Dublin. I hope it's only going to get better and better as well. Solo piano is something that I've been really interested in. Getting to do the Jarrett concert a couple of times last year and hopefully a couple of times this year has been really, really fun. So I want to do more and more solo piano. I'm really interested in reaching out into classical venues as well and trying to get jazz piano into these places as well, because a lot of the stuff that I would improvise at the piano is basically like advanced classical music as well. It's not just all jazz tunes. So I want to do as much solo piano as possible. You know, I know it's very selfish to do solo piano, but I don't care. Here we are.